2 weeks ago my life collapsed right in front of my eyes. I wish that sentence was dramatic exaggeration, something people say after a bad breakup or a rough week at work. I wish I could tell you I was simply being emotional, but I'm not. When I think back to that day, I can still hear the sound that started it all. My phone vibrated once while I was making breakfast. Just one notification. Nothing about that moment felt important. I was half awake, humming to myself, planning the rest of my Saturday. I remember thinking about grocery shopping, cleaning my apartment, maybe watching a movie later that evening. It was supposed to be one of those ordinary weekends you forget about a week later. Instead, it became the day that divided my life into 2 chapters, everything before that notification, and everything after it. If someone had walked into my apartment and told me that by sunset I would lose almost everything I thought was stable, I would have laughed. I truly believed I had my life under control. The message came from an unknown number. At first I assumed it was spam. It simply read, "You deserve to know the truth before everyone else does." No greeting, no explanation, just those 10 words. Most people would have ignored it, but curiosity has always been my biggest weakness. I replied with a simple question mark. A minute passed, then another. Suddenly 3 images appeared. I stared at the screen without understanding what I was looking at. It took my brain several seconds to process the faces. One of them was my fiancé. The woman standing beside him wasn't me. They weren't co-workers. They weren't friends. They were kissing, not just once, multiple pictures, different dates, different clothes, different places. My stomach dropped so hard I genuinely thought I was going to pass out. My hands started shaking so violently that I almost dropped my phone into the sink. I kept convincing myself they had to be edited. Fake, AI generated, anything except real. Before I could even recover, another message came through. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. They've been together for almost a year." My heart began pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. A year? That couldn't be right. We'd been planning our wedding. We'd already paid deposits. We'd picked out furniture for the house we were building together. We had family group chats discussing seating arrangements and honeymoon ideas. Every single memory from the past year suddenly felt contaminated. Every smile, every vacation photo, every "I love you." I found myself scrolling through my own gallery looking for clues I'd somehow missed. How could someone lie that convincingly every single day? Was every kiss rehearsed? Every hug fake? Or was I simply too blind to notice what everyone else already knew? I called him immediately. No answer. Again, straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. The panic slowly transformed into anger, real anger, the kind that makes your vision blur and your breathing heavy. I threw my coffee mug across the kitchen without even realizing it. It shattered against the wall, spraying ceramic pieces across the floor. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to his apartment. Every traffic light felt personal. Every slow driver in front of me felt like an enemy delaying the truth. By the time I arrived, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. His car was there. That was enough confirmation for me. I knocked once, no answer, twice, still nothing. Then I started pounding on the door hard enough that one of the neighbors peeked outside. Finally, the door opened just a few inches. He looked exhausted, but not surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. He wasn't confused about why I was there. He wasn't asking what was wrong. He looked like someone who'd been expecting this exact moment. That expression hurt more than the pictures. It meant he knew his secret was over. Before I could even speak, I pushed the door open and walked inside. The apartment smelled like perfume that definitely wasn't mine. Sitting on the couch was a woman I'd never met before. She looked terrified. She quickly stood up, grabbed her purse, and rushed toward the exit without saying a word. Neither of us tried to stop her. The silence between us was unbearable. Finally, I held my phone up and asked the only question that mattered. "Is it true?" He didn't deny it. He didn't even hesitate. He simply lowered his head and whispered, "Yes." One word, just one word was enough to destroy 5 years together. 5 years of birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners, inside jokes, dreams, sacrifices, and promises, all reduced to one tiny word. I kept waiting for him to say there was more to the story, that it had ended months ago, that he regretted everything. Instead, he admitted something even worse. It wasn't just an affair. He'd been secretly planning a future with her too. 2 different women, 2 different futures, 1 double life. I don't remember everything I said after that. Trauma has a strange way of erasing details. I know I cried, I know I screamed, I know I asked questions no answer could ever fix. Why propose to me? Why let me plan a wedding? Why meet my parents every weekend? Every answer sounded the same. I didn't know how to tell you. as if honesty had somehow become impossible, as if lying every single day had been easier than telling one painful truth. I walked out before he finished explaining because I realized something important. There wasn't going to be an explanation that made betrayal make sense. I drove aimlessly for almost 2 hours before parking outside my parents' house. I couldn't even bring myself to go inside immediately. I sat in the car staring at the steering wheel, wondering how I was supposed to tell everyone that the wedding they'd all been excited about was never going to happen. I wasn't just mourning a relationship anymore. I was mourning the future I'd already imagined, the children we'd talked about, the home we'd designed, the life I thought was guaranteed. Losing a person is painful, but losing the version of your future you believed in is a completely different kind of heartbreak. As I finally stepped out of the car, I had no idea that this betrayal was only the beginning. Because within the next 48 hours, I would discover a second secret, one so devastating that it would make the affair seem like the smallest part of the nightmare. The person I trusted most after him had been hiding something too, and when I uncovered it, my entire world truly collapsed. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos all over again. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends wanted updates. Family members kept asking why I sounded so upset. My fiancé had already started calling me repeatedly, leaving voicemail after voicemail, begging me to let him explain. I couldn't bring myself to listen to a single one. Whatever explanation he had wasn't going to erase a year of lies. Around 6 a.m, I finally got out of bed, made myself a cup of coffee I never even drank, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wedding binder we'd spent months putting together. The guest list, the seating chart, the venue contract. Every page felt like evidence from a crime scene. I started pulling everything apart, throwing invitations into the trash one by one until I couldn't stop crying. That's when my older sister walked in. She didn't ask questions. She simply hugged me while I completely fell apart. Once I calmed down enough to speak, I told her everything. I expected shock, maybe even anger on my behalf. Instead, she went strangely quiet. She wouldn't look me in the eyes. At first, I assumed she was just processing everything, but then I noticed her hands trembling. I asked if she was okay. She nodded too quickly and said she was fine. Something about her reaction didn't sit right with me. Before leaving, she hugged me again and whispered something I'll never forget. "I'm so sorry. Not I'm sorry this happened. Just, I'm so sorry." It felt personal somehow. At the time, I didn't understand why those words sounded different. I would understand later. By that afternoon, I had started calling vendors to cancel the wedding. Every conversation felt humiliating. Some people were kind. Others asked uncomfortable questions. Did someone pass away? Can the wedding simply be postponed? I eventually stopped explaining and just said there had been a family emergency. It was easier than admitting the person I'd trusted with my entire future had been living a double life. While sorting through paperwork, I realized something else. Most of the deposits had come from my savings account. I'd spent years building that money, believing it was for our future together. Now, thousands of dollars were simply gone. Between cancellation fees and non-refundable deposits, heartbreak suddenly came with a financial price tag too. Late that evening, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't my ex. It was one of his co-workers. We had met several times at company events, so I answered without thinking. He sounded nervous. After a long pause, he asked, "Has he told you everything?" I immediately said yes, assuming he meant the affair. There was another long silence before he quietly replied, "No, I don't think he has." My heart sank all over again. I asked him what he meant, but he hesitated. Finally, he said something that made my stomach twist. "You should probably check the house contract before you sign anything else." Then he hung up. I drove straight to the construction office the following morning. The woman at reception recognized me immediately because I'd been there so many times with my fiancé. I explained that I needed copies of all our paperwork. She smiled politely until she looked at her computer. Her expression changed instantly. She frowned, clicked through several screens, then looked back at me with confusion. "Ma'am, according to our records, you're not listed as an owner." I laughed because I genuinely thought she'd made a mistake. I told her we'd designed the entire house together. We'd chosen every single tile, every cabinet, every paint color. She apologized and turned the monitor toward me. There it was in black and white. Only one name appeared on every legal document. His. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I asked how that was possible when I'd contributed nearly half the down payment. She simply explained that payments don't automatically make someone a legal owner. My signature had never been required because I'd never actually been added to the contract. Suddenly, every excuse he had ever made started replaying in my head. The paperwork isn't ready yet. We'll add your name after settlement. The lawyer said we'll handle it later. I believed every word because I trusted him completely. I had literally paid for a house that legally belonged only to the man who had betrayed me. As if that wasn't enough, the office manager quietly pulled me aside before I left. She lowered her voice and asked if everything was okay at home. Apparently my ex had visited the office several times over the past year with another woman. Most employees simply assumed she'd been his fiancée because of how comfortable they looked together. They'd toured the property, picked finishes, discussed future renovations. They had unknowingly been helping another couple plan the very house I believed was ours. I thanked her for being honest before walking outside and breaking down in the parking lot. I couldn't even breathe. It felt like every happy memory from the last 12 months had been stolen and handed to someone else. That night I confronted him one final time. We met in a quiet cafe because I refused to let him into my apartment. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. For a split second I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the paperwork. I placed copies of the house contract on the table between us. His face lost all colour. He knew exactly why I was there. I asked him one question. Were you ever planning to tell me the truth? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rubbed his face and whispered, I thought I could fix everything before you found out. I couldn't help laughing through my tears. Fix everything? How do you fix a year of lies? How do you fix stealing someone's future? Then he admitted something that changed everything. The affair hadn't started because he'd fallen out of love with me. It had started because he'd been living beyond his means. He was drowning in debt, credit cards, personal loans, and gambling losses he had hidden from everyone. The other woman came from a wealthy family and had been helping him financially. He confessed he'd convinced himself he could somehow keep both relationships alive until he solved his money problems. He wanted my stability and her financial support. Hearing those words made me physically sick. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was simply part of a plan. I stood up to leave, but before I reached the door he quietly said, There's something else you need to know. I turned around, expecting one final excuse. Instead, he looked at me with genuine fear. Your sister already knew. The cafe suddenly felt silent. I thought I'd misheard him. He repeated himself slowly. She found out months ago and begged me to tell you before the wedding. My entire body went numb. I couldn't even respond. My sister. The one person who had held me while I cried, the one who said she was sorry. She had known all along. I walked out without saying another word. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. Every memory with my sister over the past few months suddenly looked different. Every time she asked how wedding planning was going. Every time she smiled during family dinners. Every hug. Every conversation. Had she really been carrying that secret the entire time? As I drove home, my phone lit up with an incoming call. It was my sister. For several seconds I simply stared at the screen, wondering whether I was about to hear the truth or another lie. I answered my sister's call after staring at my phone for what felt like forever. I didn't greet her or ask how she was doing. The only thing I wanted to know was how long she had been keeping this from me. There was a long silence before she finally whispered, about 4 months. Hearing those words felt like someone had punched me in the chest. For 4 entire months, she'd known the man I was going to marry had been living a double life. She had watched me excitedly talk about the wedding, helped me choose decorations, smiled through family dinners, and hugged me whenever I felt stressed, all while carrying a secret that could have saved me from even more heartbreak. Through tears, she explained that she'd accidentally discovered messages on his phone during a family gathering. She confronted him immediately, demanding that he tell me the truth. According to her, he begged for another chance, promised the affair was over, and swore he would confess everything before the wedding. She believed him because she thought she was protecting me from unnecessary pain. I listened without interrupting until she finally stopped talking. Then I quietly told her the truth she needed to hear. She hadn't been protecting me at all. She had been protecting the man who betrayed me. There was nothing left to say after that, and I ended the call knowing that I had lost not only my relationship, but also a huge part of the trust I had in my own family. The following week became one of the hardest periods of my life. Every single day was spent cancelling wedding plans that had once filled me with excitement. I called the venue, the photographer, the caterers, the florist, the musicians, and every business we'd booked months in advance. Each conversation forced me to explain that the wedding was no longer happening, and every explanation reopened the wound all over again. Friends and relatives soon learned what had happened, and while many stood by my side, others disappointed me more than I ever imagined. Some insisted that relationships were complicated, and that people deserved second chances. Others hinted that maybe I hadn't been giving him enough attention or affection. Hearing people search for excuses for someone else's betrayal made me realize how easily the victim is sometimes blamed simply because accepting the truth makes other people uncomfortable. Just when I thought there couldn't possibly be another surprise waiting for me, I received a message from the other woman. At first, I had no intention of replying. I blamed her for everything because I believed she had knowingly stolen the person I loved. But curiosity eventually won, and I agreed to meet her. The moment she sat down across from me, I noticed she looked just as nervous and exhausted as I felt. Without saying much, she removed an engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table between us. Then she quietly admitted that she had never known I still existed in his life. According to everything he had told her, I was simply an ex-girlfriend who refused to move on and kept trying to get back together with him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She handed me her phone, and together we spent hours comparing messages, photographs, dates, vacations, birthdays, and holidays. Piece by piece, we realized that neither of us had been the enemy. We had both been manipulated by the same person. He hadn't just lied once or twice. He had carefully built two completely different relationships, telling each woman exactly what she needed to hear to keep believing in him. Before we left, she apologized despite having nothing to apologize for and said something that stayed with me long afterward. He hadn't lost one relationship that day. He had lost two people who genuinely loved him. As the weeks passed, the financial reality became impossible to ignore. Between the non-refundable wedding deposits, the money I had contributed toward a house that legally wasn't mine, and countless smaller expenses, I had lost nearly $28,000. Years of hard work and careful saving had disappeared because I trusted someone who never deserved that trust. For a while, the emotional pain was overwhelming. I struggled to sleep, barely ate, and questioned my own judgment every single day. I wondered how someone could look me in the eyes, promise me forever, and then spend an entire year secretly building another future with someone else. It felt as though every happy memory had become a lie, and I wasn't sure whether I would ever be able to trust anyone again. Eventually, though, I realized that staying trapped inside my grief was only allowing him to keep taking things from me. I had already lost my relationship, my savings, and the future I thought I was going to have. I refused to let him take my happiness too. I started making small changes. I joined a gym, began seeing a therapist, reconnected with friends I had unintentionally neglected during the relationship, and even took a short trip by myself. None of those things magically erased the pain, but they reminded me that I still had a life worth living. Slowly, I stopped defining myself by what had happened to me and started focusing on the person I wanted to become instead. Months later, the wedding date finally arrived. Instead of standing at an altar waiting for someone who had never truly chosen me, I spent that day hiking with a few close friends. As we watched the sun disappear beyond the mountains, I realized I had smiled more that afternoon than I had in months. Around the same time, I heard through mutual friends that my ex's carefully constructed life had completely fallen apart. The other woman ended their relationship after discovering the truth. His financial problems eventually caught up with him, and he lost the very house he had hidden from me because he could no longer afford the payments. Everything he had lied to protect eventually disappeared anyway. My relationship with my sister remained broken for a long time. We barely spoke for 6 months. Eventually, she wrote me a heartfelt letter, accepting full responsibility for staying silent. She didn't make excuses or ask me to forget what happened. She simply admitted that her decision had been one of the greatest mistakes of her life. Forgiving her wasn't easy, and rebuilding trust took much longer than either of us expected, but over time I realized that forgiveness wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about refusing to let bitterness control the rest of my life. Looking back now, I no longer see those events as the day my life ended. At the time, it certainly felt that way. I truly believed everything I had worked toward had been destroyed beyond repair. But with enough time and distance, I realized something else had happened that day. The future I had imagined wasn't taken away from me. It was replaced by one that was built on honesty instead of lies. Sometimes life falls apart because it is making room for something better, even when we are too heartbroken to see it. If you're reading this while your own world feels like it's collapsing, I hope you remember this. Not every ending is meant to punish you. Sometimes the most painful chapter of your life becomes the reason you discover the strength you never knew you had. 2 weeks ago, I thought my life had collapsed right in front of my eyes. Today, I know it was simply the beginning of a life I actually deserved. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share and comment for more crazy confessions I get from people.